You lift up the tarp, and you definitely see that there is a human body there.
I had never really seen a mummified victim before.
Lungs was not there, the intestines, even the brain. Everything is gone.
Who is this person? How did they die?
We need to figure out what happened, why it happened, and when it happened.
Why wasn't she missed? Wasn't she loved?
I've never seen anything quite like this.
Every murder is a mystery. But a victim's body is a sea of evidence. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound, a piece of the puzzle. The medical examiner holds the key to unlock their stories and catch a killer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
Chester is a little border town, almost to the Kansas border. It's picturesque, some rolling hills and things. It's pretty.
It's a very small town. Everybody knows everybody else's business.
Chester is the kind of place where if you were a person who locked your door and you forgot, you would totally not sweat it.
You just don't hear anything about Chester other than something positive. And this was certainly a great departure from that.
A phone call to police triggers a mystery that rocks this tight-knit town to its core.
They said, well, we've got a body that's in a garage, and we think it's been there for a while. And I believe it used to be a gas station at one time.
It was just nondescript, maybe it would be a good word, and yeah, it was nothing that you looked at and you thought, oh, something terrible happened there.
You open the door, and there's a tarp right behind a van.
When officers remove the tarp, they're shocked by what they find.
This body is mummified. I mean, this body has been here for a while.
It is rare to find a mummified body. First of all, the body has to be left unattended, and it has to be in the right environmental conditions.
First, detectives need to find out how the body was discovered.
Some curious neighbors were thinking about purchasing the property.
Mick and Becky Gossman live right next door.
If you are going to go into an abandoned building, you really aren't worried about finding anything, maybe an animal. You know, you might worry, oh, maybe there's a raccoon in there or a skunk in there, but you would never in a million years worry about finding something like this.
Mick Gossman found this key in the door. They peeked in, and then they entered the house and was looking through it, and then came across this tarp.
The Gossmans claim to have no idea where the key came from, but their story is suspicious.
They had this key, and access to the house, proximity to the house, knowledge of the house. You do want to make sure that they're not involved.
Sometimes a killer will insert themselves into an ongoing investigation. Part of the reason they do this is that they're trying to gather intel and figure out if the police are onto their tail.
Right away, the neighbors are grilled about the house and its occupants.
What do you know? What was your relationship with them? Did you speak with them? You take pieces from that and try to verify whatever information that they are giving you.
After checking their alibis, it's clear the Gossmans' only interest is to buy the house.
Mick Gossman and his family was not involved with the body that was found.
For detectives Kranz and Funkhauser, their next step is to identify the victim.
As we looked at the body, it was undetermined as to age or sex because the body had been there quite some time, the skin had shrunk, and facial features were reduced. Those features of the body which would normally help identify somebody just weren't apparent. Who is this person? What's their story? How did they die?
Sometimes investigators are faced with unidentified remains that may have been in that position for months. And that's a very difficult situation for any homicide investigator because you need to know who your victim is. That's sort of ground zero. That's where you begin.
The body is moved to the morgue, where the coroner's physician, Dr. Okoye, looks for answers. Born in Nigeria, Okoye was chief medical examiner in Washington, D.C., before moving to Nebraska in 1991.
In high school, I started reading Agatha Christie novels. And I became very interested to find out why people die and if they are killed, how they were killed. The fascination is that no case is the same.
Dr. Okoye, he's a unique man. He's highly educated. He's an attorney. He's a medical doctor. He's a well-known forensic pathologist. But in his heart, he's an investigator.
When we get this body out of the body bag, Dr. Okoye flips the body over, and the first thing he says is, well, this is female.
We took photograph of the general body, took measurement of the body. We noted there was not much flesh except the mummified skin.
The unusual state of the woman's remains makes it harder to identify the body and unlock the cause of death.
In mummification, the skin loses the moisture. The skin becomes dry, wrinkled, become parchment-like, thick.
Mummification is the postmortem process of both decaying and drying out at the same time. Mummification occurs only under certain conditions in which there is a dry environment that would allow for evaporation of water inside the body and leave the tissues on the bones.
Dr. Okoye uses state-of-the-art technology to get a better look at the leather-like skin.
We like to do 3D CT scan of the whole body. I want to look in before I go in.
CAT scans will help you identify problems in advance. For example, whether or not there's a projectile or bullet that is in the body that has to be located and recovered. CAT scans can also tell you whether or not there are new broken bones or old broken bones, liver disease, heart disease, any number of problems that you want to know about in advance.
You can look at the face. You can rotate the face. You can look from inside of the skull cavity. It's very detailed. I can't handle any case that is complicated without 3D CT scan.
The scan of the mummified body reveals evidence that changes the course of the investigation.
There are fractures of the face. The nasal bones were fractured, and also the sinus on the left side was fractured. There are skull fractures, 1 or 2 at the back of the head. You could see the long groove with the depressed fracture, which an implement or a weapon that could have caused that.
Dr. Okoye performs a physical examination of the skull. and finds more chilling details.
You could see duct tape around the head, front, back, and then there was a plastic bag covering over the head.
The skull fractures and plastic bag paint a disturbing picture of how Jane Doe died.
It suggests that she suffered multiple blows. But why do we have a plastic bag with duct tape?
Mummification has prevented investigators from making an ID, but Dr. Okoye has proven that Jane Doe is the victim of a violent homicide.
We didn't know why the killer covered her head with a sack. Whether it was to hide her identity, or if it was to suffocate her, or it was to contain the blood that was coming out from her head. We knew it was done for a reason. The victim had gone through a horrific experience.
Residents of Chester, Nebraska are shocked that a mummified body with a crushed skull has been found in their small town, and police have few clues about the murder.
We've got some work to do. We need to get this body identified positively, and we need to figure out what happened, why it happened, and when it happened.
Detective Roger Kranz has been investigating homicides for 25 years.
My goal in life was to be a high school science teacher. But I've found my way into law enforcement. I wanted to apply science to my career as much as I could. My responsibility is to ensure that I have got my facts straight, because I wanted to make sure when our case is done, that it is done right.
Investigators focus on the house. It's their only link to the mummified victim.
The house had remained empty for several years.
And the first thing I notice is that there are quilts everywhere, covering windows, covering the doorway. I'm thinking somebody didn't like the light. There's a bed to your right when you first walk in. Then that bed turns into the kitchen, and then off the kitchen there's another bedroom. We examined the doors, we examined the windows, and we could not find any sign of forced entry into this house. There was a purse. If this house had been burglarized, somebody definitely would have taken the time to steal whatever valuables they could, because they were everywhere.
There were an awful lot of antiques in this home without a lot of other objects that would indicate that someone lived there as a family. There were numerous pieces of furniture and glassware and vases and things like that that just didn't fit in this place.
But antiques aren't the only unusual items they find inside.
It looked like there was food that had been sitting on a table forever. There was broccoli there, and it looked petrified. There was Christmas decorations up, and everything's dated 7 years or so prior. This was February 2003, and a TV guide that's sitting on the bed is December of 1997. It's like you walked into a place that time forgot, that all of a sudden people are here doing whatever they do, and instead of packing and leaving, they just disappeared, like alien abduction, or just walked off the face of the earth.
Right away, we wanted to know who were the last people to have lived at this residence.
We'd find some paperwork in there from the purchase of the house, showing that this was purchased by John Mooney and a Janet Brousseau. The house was in Janet Brousseau's name. John Mooney's name was found on other documents.
In Chester, everyone knows everybody. But John Mooney and Janet Brousseau are a mystery.
The people that lived here said that John and Janet kept to themselves quite a bit. They were friendly, but you didn't see them a whole lot during the day.
They said they worked in antiques. People mentioned that they covered their vehicles right after they got there, and they had tarps up around part of the property. Well, they thought that was odd. People who talked with Janet, they described her as bubbly, intelligent, had a laugh that you kind of remembered. It was a very engaging laugh. People guessed that Janet was in her 40s. She was very pretty.
A picture of John and Janet emerges, frozen in time.
There was kind of two trains of thought on the couple. The people who didn't know them thought, well, maybe they were just a little bit suspicious because they don't know what they're doing here. Then other people who had interacted with them liked them, especially Janet.
But everyone in town agrees on one thing. They came and left quickly.
We speak with neighbors saying that, yes, they were there, and all of a sudden they're gone.
Police wonder when Janet and John left town and when the body was concealed in the garage.
We realized that we need to find John Mooney and Janet Brousseau to find out if they're alive.
John Mooney, there's probably 150, 200 John Mooneys in the United States. And in 2003, it was a little harder to find them than it is now.
But with Janet Brousseau, we thought that if she was missing, that there should have been a report or something out there.
Janet had not been reported missing by anyone.
The cases that frustrate investigators the most are the ones where they continue to hit walls. They've got a murder, they want to solve it, and yet they're blocked every step of the way.
While police take the hunt for John and Janet nationwide, Dr. Okoye continues his examination to ID Jane Doe.
By looking at the ossification of the bones and also looking at the sutures of the skull. When they closed, the age was estimated between 45 or 46 and 61.
The age of the bones suggests the remains could be Janet. Detectives asked Dr. Okoye to investigate when their Jane Doe died. If they can get a clear timeline, they can compare it to Janet and John's time spent living in the house.
The investigators at the scene said she weighed like 30, 40 pounds because all the moisture had left the body. So we had a pretty good idea the body had been there quite some time, but we didn't know exactly how long.
He begins by examining the mummified skin.
Mummification would have occurred in hot climates within a short time. When the temperature is hot and dry, the early postmortem decomposition changes start very fast. And in hot climates, like southern part of the US, you can have mummification within weeks.
Nebraska's dry climate with extremely hot summers speed up mummification, so the skin proves to be no help in establishing a time of death. But Dr. Okoye isn't giving up. He looks deeper at the decomposition of the internal organs.
There are a number of stages of decomposition. One of the things that happens when you die is bacteria in your gut begin to proliferate. At room temperature, those sorts of changes become apparent after about 24 hours. When a body is placed in a cool environment, it slows down the process of decomposition. It would slow down the overgrowth of bacteria. We refrigerate bodies in the morgue for the same reason that a refrigerator is used to keep food fresh. It slows down the decaying process.
If Dr. Okoye can determine how fast or slow the organs decomposed, he may have an answer.
There were no organs left with the body.
Over time, the cells die in a process known as autolysis, and the mummy's organs dissolve.
Spleen was not there. Lungs, the intestines, and also outside the intestines. Even the brain, decomposed and autolyzed. Everything is gone. You don't have scientific evidence.
As we looked at the body, it was obviously undetermined as to, the exact time of death.
After 2 forensic tests, all Dr. Okoye can tell detectives is that Jane Doe could have been murdered months or years ago. For investigators, it's one more challenge in cracking the mystery of the mummy.
If you haven't identified the victim, you have nowhere to look other than missing person reports. And people travel all over the place, and people visit other states and other cities. So that information is always fluid and always changing.
We had a mummified body, no apparent suspects. Looking back on the death cases that we investigated, I've never seen anything quite like this.
Police believe John Mooney and Janet Brousseau are linked to the murder of a mummified Jane Doe in Chester, Nebraska. But they can't track them down.
The fact that it involved people that weren't local residents of Chester. They didn't have family down there, they didn't have friends. They didn't really have a record in the community. So it made it difficult to find out where they may or may not be.
They get a lead when an old criminal record for a Janet Brousseau surfaces.
We did receive a mugshot of Janet Brousseau when she was still in her teens, and it was from the Massachusetts area that she had been arrested for some type of moral violation at the time.
The mugshot sends the detectives to Massachusetts to find her family.
It was absolutely critical to find them. Have they seen her? Have they heard from her? Do you know of this John Mooney? Was there a relationship? Just so many unanswered questions.
They track Janet's family to Boston and finally get some answers.
Fortunately, we were able to identify Janet. We were able to run down a family who had lived there.
When we got Janet positively ID'd, it enabled us to focus a little more now.
Janet was certainly an interesting woman. She was very independent.
I was able to talk to the family, and I was glad that I had the chance to do that because that human side came out. She was very intelligent. It was mainly self-taught. Maybe had some study in psychology. Became kind of a free spirit later in her life and started to travel a lot.
Janet had not been reported missing by anyone because of her kind of nomadic travels. It was not unusual to not hear from her for a long period of time. She left her family years before and then started this life with John. Traveling around the South, they were in Louisiana, Nebraska, and Kansas. They were in New Mexico.
Detectives believe that Janet is most likely their mummified Jane Doe, but they still need a way to prove it. With so much still unknown, they returned to Chester to try and determine where the murder took place.
The van that was parked at the garage belonged to Janet Brousseau and had New Mexico license plates on it.
A forensic team scours the van looking for any link to Janet or the killer.
Was there blood tracings? Is there any type of hair? You know, there should be hair. Everybody sheds drastically, whether they know it or not.
There was no blood in the van. We didn't find any evidence that she had been killed in the van and shed any blood there.
The team moves into the house, hoping to find evidence that the murder took place inside.
They're looking for signs of a struggle, possible weapons used, blood evidence. What they really found was an area of the house that was much cleaner than the rest of the house. Someone had gone to an effort to clean up in the large room of this basically two-bedroom home. And there were some cleaning materials still around, some cleaners, some paper towels. There was a bucket and a mop. We're fairly certain that something had happened in that area because of the effort made to clean it up.
The question is, what is going on? What do we think? What do we know? What can we prove? It's a very big mystery because we just didn't know.
But detectives are convinced the house is the murder scene. They just need to find the proof that's hidden somewhere inside.
We've got to figure out where she was killed. And so we had asked Dr. Okoye, how can we prove that this happened here? You know, the scene had been cleaned up and had years of dust settled over the top.
The abandoned house has been frozen in time since December 1997, when Janet and John lived there. Dr. Okoye believes there is a way to link it to the murder victim. He asks Nicole Wall, a palynology expert, to join his team.
Palynology is the study of pollen and other fine filaments or dust particles. In forensic science, it helps with location of death. It can also help with time of death, meaning seasonality or time of year.
Evidence of a murder in the house was cleaned up, but plates in the kitchen were left dirty with food. If Nicole can match pollen on the food to pollen inside the victim, it proves that she ate her last meal right there.
There's broccoli on the kitchen table. There's honey inside the kitchen. You know, we have these things there.
Because of the fact that she was naturally mummified, soft tissue was still surrounding the body. Dry soft tissue would indicate dietary-wise perhaps what she ate. Because the inside organs, like the stomach and the intestines, broke down to some extent, we knew that the enclosed abdomen would be a good sampling spot. So we sampled from there, and we got some really good results from that stomach area. The pollen that we found is one of my favorites, the brassica pollen. It's a generalized pollen type that can be attributed to either broccoli or cauliflower.
In simple terms, what we're determining more and more is that she was killed inside this house in Chester, Nebraska.
Finding a location where the victim was killed is often a turning point in an ongoing investigation. It opens up a new realm of possibilities for investigators.
We know now for a fact that a former resident, somebody that was here, should not have been dead.
Everything points to a murder inside the house, and Janet Brousseau as the victim.
Thinking that it's probably Janet. You know, it's probably, but that's not good enough. You've got to get her identified.
We were trying to resolve a mystery. We needed to find a cold-hearted killer.
Investigators in Nebraska believe their mummified murder victim is Janet Brousseau. But due to the bloodless state of the body, DNA may be the only way to prove it.
Trying to identify an unknown person is really critical for the investigation. Advances in DNA technology have revolutionized identification in forensic science. So now, tooth pulp can be used to answer a lot of questions for you.
But in 2003, extracting a DNA sample from teeth is a new technique.
Not everything is gone. The teeth were all in place. So we took molar teeth from the deceased for DNA analysis. And we were lucky. She contributed some chromosomes and some genes. The DNA profile was used for testing.
Investigators turned to Janet's family in Boston to make the comparison.
We were able to get a sample from her family,
which ultimately matched up to her DNA and led us to identify her as Janet Brousseau.
so now it's 100%. We know it's her.
Lost and abandoned for years, detectives want to talk to the last person to see Janet alive.
The mission now that we've got Janet identified, we need to find John, because the last that we knew from speaking with the townspeople and from the documents we found inside the house, they were together last that we were aware of.
But tracking John Mooney isn't easy. No one's seen him in years.
Finding John was a dilemma. He was a tough man to find. Number one, is he still alive? And what does he know, or what can he tell us about Janet?
Hoping to get a lead on John's whereabouts, detectives dive into Chester's town records.
We're finding out that John Mooney is paying taxes on this house for this entire time that they're not there.
I think the taxes on that house were $80 or $90 a year, or something like that. It wasn't very much money.
Following his tax records, John Mooney is traced to California.
Roger Kranz and I jumped on an airplane and flew to Oceanside, and we went and knocked on John's door. And we found him at an apartment there in Oceanside, living with his wife, Tony. Our goal was to find out what happened and how can we verify that he wasn't involved. If John Mooney didn't kill Janet Brousseau, we had a real mystery, because there were no other suspects. There were no other people involved in her life that we knew of.
John tells the detectives that after he and Janet split up, he never heard from her again.
He denied really knowing anything. It had been a long time ago. He told us that he had dropped Janet off at a truck stop in Kansas and that she wanted to go back to Cape Cod, and that was the last he'd seen her. That was going to be a real problem for us. You know, there are probably 80 truck stops within 200 miles of Kansas. We knew the chances of anybody remembering these two people was slim to none.
Detectives push hard for more details, and John finally opens up, telling them his version of his relationship with Janet.
According to John, he was being quote-unquote treated for depression by Janet, who, in John's description, was a knowledgeable psychiatrist. John would be hit on the head for depression, for his alcoholism, for just John not being the perfect John that Janet wanted.
If the person you're interviewing has mental health issues or substance abuse issues, this changes the dynamic of the interview. You can't take everything at face value because you don't understand what's going on in their minds and what stressors they are encountering at that particular time. So it's absolutely vital that everything they say be confirmed or corroborated.
He said she was beating him, and he took it. And not only was she beating him to correct his behavior, she was billing him for the hours she spent doing it. She would make him sign an IOU to Janet Brousseau for 1 hour of psychotherapy treatment. So not only did she have physical control, she also controlled his money, which I think was another driving force in him saying that he'd had enough and he was going to end it on his terms.
Detectives quickly realize that John's shocking story is turning into a confession.
He denied having anything to do with it at first, but as the interview went on, Mark said something to the effect of, so what'd you do, just grab a tire iron or something? Then the answer was, well, yeah, it was a crowbar.
Detectives from the Nebraska State Patrol have tracked down John Mooney, and he's admitted to the killing of Janet Brousseau.
John told us that she regularly would crack him in the head, and she did that to correct his behavior.
He said that he told her, stop it, knocked this off, walked away, and that she continued to pursue him. And John said that he picked up the crowbar and that he had struck her in the face and that she fell. And that while she was on the ground, he hit her the second time. While she was on the floor, he took a plastic bag, white plastic bag, put it over her head because he didn't want her looking at him. He said he sat on Janet's bed, smoked some cigarettes, and then decided to move her to the garage. He put a tarp over her, cleaned up the kitchen, and left the house in Chester the next morning.
John confirms that he killed Janet in 1997, 6 years earlier.
At the conclusion of our interview with him, he was arrested for the murder of Janet Brousseau.
Despite his detailed confession, John changes his story after his arrest.
Initially, he was charged with first-degree murder, and he pled not guilty to that. And he started presenting a defense, let's throw out the confession.
Sometimes an offender will say that they did this crime in self-defense, and this is a way to mitigate their responsibility in the killing.
John claims he only hit Janet to protect himself.
Self-defense is a very difficult defense to run in any trial. I had to do what I did because I feared for my own safety, I feared for my own life. But there's always things to look for to defeat that defense. You have to look at the victim and you have to look at the injuries to the victim, differences in size, differences in motivations. All of these things play in to whether self-defense is even a viable defense.
Detectives believe John Mooney planned to kill Janet, and his story of self-defense is a lie. To prove it, they turn to Dr. Okoye.
You have to use the data you got collected when you were doing the medical investigation and doing the autopsy. I consider causation to be important, and you have to have rational basis for saying anything you say. And it's definitely a homicide. Look at, she has multiple blunt force trauma to the head, at the back, and the strike in the back of the head will be devastating and debilitating to her, and she will fall. But falling does not give you the fractures of the face that she got, because those are due to blunt force traumatic injuries. Now, after that, you have the plastic bag. And then the duct tape. It suggests that he wanted to make sure that she dies. That is, after she suffered the blows on the head, the cause of death was listed in the order of occurrence: blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. It's intentional. That the intent is to kill.
Based on Dr. Okoye's testimony, John Mooney pleads no contest to murder in the second degree and is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
The science was important. Without the science, we wouldn't have gone anywhere.
If it weren't for the incredible value of the scientific analysis done by Dr. Okoye and others, we wouldn't have been able to put together a good murder case. It was science that helped us identify Janet Brousseau as the victim of this crime. It was science that helped us prove that the killing occurred in Nebraska. It was science that helped us prove the cause and the manner of death.
What John Mooney did here was wrong. I felt horrible for Janet's family and for Janet herself. Nobody deserves that.
For the people in Chester, when they talked about Janet, they said, well, why wasn't she missed? Wasn't she loved? And the family was saying, what kind of place is Chester that she was there for years and no one found her? So it was good to bring those two things together, and the family really wanted to emphasize that she was loved. She was very loved.